I am Marcus James Dixon with Gold Derby, and we are here with Salvador Perez, the Emmy-nominated costume designer on Disney Plus's Hocus Pocus 2. And this is actually your second Emmy nomination after the Mindy Project in 2015. Tell us about the Emmy nominations morning this year. How did you find out about your nomination?
It's funny. I'm on a project in Savannah, Georgia, and I had forgotten about the Emmys. And we're on a swamp in Savannah, and I'm dirtying up a costume, and I get a text from a fellow nominee, Shauna Tripsick, and she's like, "Congratulations!" I'm like, "For what?" Oh my God! And then of course I'm trying to like madly, confirm what it was. So it's I didn't expect it. So that's sort of it just makes it that more special because I didn't, I thought it's such a big field. There's so much competition. The movie's a year old. So to be recognized was just, cake with icing and then cake on top of icing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your category is Best Fantasy Sci-Fi Costumes. And I mean, speaking of competition, you're up against comedies, dramas, spin-offs, limited series, a little amalgamation of everything. And what would it mean if Emmy voters picked you as the winner?
I mean, this project has been just a gift from the get-go. I mean, when I first heard about the project, I was excited. And then I got to meet Ann Fletcher and Lynn Harris, and we had like a 3-hour interview. Because I had just had I'm not just I'm a huge fan of Hocus Pocus in general. So to be able to take on the reins to that movie was kind of awesome. So it's just been a gift. And then, to get to work with Bette and Sarah and Kathy and this is the gift that just keeps on giving. So a year later to still be celebrated with an Emmy nomination from my peers is just, I couldn't ask for more in life.
The first movie was such an enormous cult hit. My family had the VHS growing up. We would watch it over and over and over. And you said you were a fan of the original too. Do you remember the first time you watched it?
Yeah, it had to have been on VHS, not even DVD, because it wasn't in the theaters. And it's just one of those movies that every time it was on, I watched it. So I've probably seen it 30 or 40 times. So when I was talking to the director and the producer about it, I knew so much of the lore. And I think that's one of the reasons that they hired me onto this. And I also had the benefit of being friends with Mary Vogt, who designed the original movie. And, was able to ask her about details and, where things came from and the meaning of the print and the symbols. And so to really have a really deep understanding of the characters and where they came from, because then taking on the daunting tasks of reinventing it, because the edict from the studio was like, well, we want them freshened, but we don't want to change them. So like, you can't change the colors, but you can change details. And so it was really about getting into the characters and like, if I had 30 years to think about what I did the first time, what would I do the second time? And having Mary Vogt's blessing was just, I think, tantamount to it. And then like, I wanted like the details, like, she, in the original coats had the printed symbols. And I thought, well, 1650s, they would have been embroidered. They would have been, what would I have done differently? And then what do the symbols mean? So I was able to like get into and get to the lore of what the symbols meant and why they were on the costume. And it was just that sort of deep dive you get to do into costume design, where it was like the little details. And I think that it was, when Bette and the cast saw their finished costumes, they were impressed. And I knew that once I had them, I was fine. Because I know that when the images first came out, the fans were like, how dare they change them? And how dare he? And there was a lot of chatter. I'm like, wait till you see them. You're seeing blurry photos, but wait till you see the actual costumes. You'll have a different opinion. And once they saw them, then the fandom has been very gracious.
Very passionate fandom, I would call
Yes.
them. And what went through your mind the first time you had all three actresses standing in front of you in full costumes, full hair and makeup? Did you kind of have an out-of-body experience?
I'm saying, like, I'm not just the costumes, I'm a huge fan. So every day on set was just so much fun. And I mean, it's funny because I had the fittings were individual. Like I fit Bette in Los Angeles, I fit Sarah and Kathy in New York. And individually, they put the costumes on and twirled. And it was very funny that they wanted movement, but they really, you could see the physicality in the characters. And so even with Bette, as we sort of developed the costume, the original costume had sort of shredded chiffon, and that's very gestury. So I made sure I found this beautiful floaty chiffon. So then when she did that, you got this moment of it. And it was the costume sort of evolved on the character, on the actors, because they needed to come to life in them. But it was very, I have these little behind the scenes videos of each of them twirling in the costume. Undirected, they just put them on and started to twirl. And again, you knew that they were feeling the characters and they had brought them to life again. Because they hadn't worn them in 30 years.
Right. Yes. A lot of people had worn them as Halloween costumes through the years, and that helped, keep the movie alive. And, Hocus Pocus 2 was rumored to happen for years and years and years. Fans kept getting their hopes up, but it never seemed to get off the ground until, now. And at what part along in the process did you join up with the production?
Well, I think we started shooting in October, and I got the call early June. And
Okay.
then I was supposed to start in July, and they're like, no, start now. We want illustrations now. So I started my development process in June, and it was, because again, you're like, how do I make them? What fabrics do I use? What's out there? What's available? And of course, this is the height of the pandemic.
Mhm.
So all the things that I wanted to find weren't necessarily accessible. So I had to find little bits of things throughout the country. I mean, each cape is 26 yards of silk hoppetie, and each actor had 8 capes.
Mm.
And there were 3 colors of it. So I had to get hundreds of yards of silk hoppetie in different colors and then dye it. And so it was just figuring out what it was we needed, because we went through many samples of fabric until I decided what they were going to wear. And then once we decided on it, it's like, where is it? Acquiring it all. And that was part of the biggest challenge. Thank God we had the time to sort of develop that. And then on top of that, we also had the contemporary characters, and the three young witches needed, and Fletcher's, the director's direction to me was, I want them to hearken to them, but don't be obvious. So like, you'll see that there's little bits of green and purple on one character, and one's red and one's pinks. And I tried to do very subtle things. And it's great because, at first, it's not so in your face. And then the fans later on got to see photos and stills, and they're like, wait a minute. I mean, like, even putting the tie-dye shirt, on Cassie was just hearkened to Max wearing it in the original movie. And I wanted to do little bits of tie-ins to the original movies that was showing that I understood the original film and I'm honoring it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the fun things that you got to do was Hannah Waddingham's character as the Mother Witch. She's a brand new character. However, her costume is kind of a tie-in to what Thora Birch was wearing as a child for Halloween. Can you talk about the process of kind of adapting a child's Halloween costume to the real thing?
That was a happy accident, not on purpose.
Oh, I love that.
Because the dress evolved. The dress was supposed to be black, and then it became red because the black was too dark. And then when we finally put it all together with the embroidery, and the embroidery just sort of came to me, like I was doing research and I saw this beautiful embroidered eye, and I'm like, oh, let's put it on the body. And then when we finished the costume, and I'm looking, and we had to remake Thora's costume because there's a flashback scene in the cemetery. So I had to make a version of Thora's costume. So it was sitting on the rack, and we put Hannah's dress on the mannequin, and I'm like, did I just make Thora's I mean, it was sort of like not on purpose. And I really questioned, like, do I need to change it? Because it looks so much like Thor. Like, nobody's ever noticed that. Don't worry about it. And of course, the audience thinks I did it on purpose, but it was a happy accident. It was divine intervention.
That's so great, because yeah, I saw the memes come out and I'm like, I never would have assumed it was an accident. Like, it was meant to be, I'm assuming.
It was meant to be, because it was just like the costume the dress evolved because we had so much time to make it. And I wanted to give her a backstory, like, where did Bet's symbolism come from? Because Bet's costume, Winnie's costume, is more medieval than 16th century. And I wanted her to have harken bits of the witch, like she was inspired by her. So like, even the embroidery I put on Winifred's costume, I put the same embroidery on the witch. And the brooch that closes Bet's coat is the same. It has a malachite on it. And then I did the same brooch on the Mother Witch, but with a carnelian. So it's like I wanted little bits of Mother Witch to inspire Winifred's costume.
There's a scene at the carnival with, a million extras in the audience, and then up on stage you have how many different sets of the sisters, including the drag queens from RuPaul's Drag Race, which was my favorite.
There was probably, I mean, because it was supposed to be a Sanderson sister Halloween contest. So, and again, there, we actually brought extras in, and a few brought their own costumes, but then we had to make our version of them. And then there's that crossover, because it's like, nobody had photos of the original witches. It was all hearsay and lore. So anybody who made them would have made them from not having seen them, but heard about them. So in the audience, I have pieces that are store-bought, you can buy the Hocus Pocus costumes. And then we started to make our own. And then the ones on stage, we had 6 sets on stage, and then probably 10 to 15 sets in the audience. So we made a lot of that. And it was having fun. Like, so when we brought on the drag versions of them, it was like, how far can I go? And then to meet those 3 divas who were like, we're game for it. And I had like 3 days to make those costumes. Wow. Because they arrived like on a Tuesday and they shot on Friday. So each of those dresses was made in 3 days.
Tony Hale is a new character for Hocus Pocus 2, and he played 2 characters.
Yes.
So how fun was that? You got to put him in the old Salem. It was
Reverend Look,
he was the mayor, and then the new mayor as well.
And that was funny. He was, again, because it's Hocus Pocus. It's a broad comedy, so you really can have fun with it. And this goes back to the twirl thing. There was this continuity. He puts on his little cape and twirled in it. And it just, when you see an actor light up in a costume, you've done your job. And the fittings were so much fun, because the actors really like, I'm in Hocus Pocus. How do I stand out in this group of 3 witches? So they all wanted something. And Tony was just so much fun. And then for his modern day mayor look, Anne's like, he's really into Halloween. So let's, really go out there with him. And we put that pumpkin outfit with the pumpkin pants, thinking like, I've gone too far. I'm going to go to designer's jail. And of course, that's the one that Anne loved. And Tony was so game to play it in that outfit. It was just like, how outrageous can you go with costumes? Because he's in that room full of all those costumes. He had to stand out as a character when everybody else is in a Halloween costume.
Another returnee was Doug Jones as Billy Butcherson, the zombie. Were you able to play with his costume at all, or did it have to remain, kind of strict to what it used to be?
My philosophy was that at the end of the last movie, the witches disintegrated. So then somewhere in purgatory, they had to have new outfits made without photos. So their new version was like, they said, this is my costume, this is what it looks like. And so they made those. So I justified the changes because the original costumes disintegrated, and these were new ones that were made in purgatory. But Billy Butcherson went into the grave and then came out 30 years later. So I couldn't justify changing his costume. And so I had met with one of the executive producers, and he had the original Billy Butcherson costume in his house. Wow. On American. And I went in and took detailed photos. And then it was trying to find those exact fabrics, because I wanted it to look as identical as possible. The only thing I cheated on was that the lace on Billy's shirt is the exact same lace as Winifred's cuff on her original costume. Oh. I think they just dyed some purple for Winnie and used it cream on Billy, thinking that you'd never see the difference. Billy's lace was, I went to an antique store and I found a bolt of beautiful French Chantilly lace that was the weirdest kind of vomit baby green ever. Like, that's why it existed, because it was such an ugly color. And then we overdyed it to match. But then his lace collar and cuffs were a lot more elaborate. But I tried to match everything else as much as possible, down to the striping on his wool vest was a 1-inch stripe, and I found the same fabric with a 4-inch difference. And so we had to cut up the fabric and bring the stripe. I mean, we had the time and the labor to put a lot of detail into the costumes, but I wanted Billy's to look as identical as, I mean, even trying to match the buttons on his jacket to the ones I found. It was that kind of detail we wanted to put into it. So Billy is my homage to the original. I'm making him identical.
Are there any other side characters you wanted to mention? Such a huge cast of main characters and supportings. And is there anyone that you're really proud of in terms of their costume?
I mean, being able to show you the 3 young witches was so much fun, because again, I wanted to subtly give them their colors. And so, Winifred's is in green and Mary's in reds and burgundies, and Sarah's in pinks and purples. And it was supposed to be 60-50, so they wouldn't have had a bright pink or a bright red. So they're very, very subdued versions of it. But if you see them in the light, there's a very subtle difference in their colors. And it was just great, like we even did, because they had little pilgrim caps, and Winnie's has a little curl to it. And excuse me, Mary's had a little curl to it, and then Winnie had the two puffs. So it was fun to do those little details in the Young Witches.
Mhm.
And then we also had to do something like 1,300 Halloween costumes that could not be licensed. Like you couldn't have a Superman or any even a Disney character. They had to be very generic costumes because you can't use licensed product on camera. So it was just hundreds and hundreds of Halloween costumes that we had to make. So we made quite a bit because Halloween should not be all store-bought. It should be, loving hands at home. So we made quite a bit, and then we just found everything out there and assembled as many costumes as possible. Because those costumes worked for weeks and weeks. I mean, they danced for, I think the dancers worked 3 weeks at night.
Wow. Yeah, it was a big production, those musical numbers toward the middle. Are there any rumors about a possible Hocus Pocus 3, or do you think is this the end of the Sanderson sisters? What do you think?
We remember because we were on set for months and we had a lot of time with the ladies, and we're like, if they did a third one, would you make a third one? And they were all, and they love these characters so much that they would all come back. And there is rumors of them trying to develop a third one. But of course, there's a writer strike, so nothing's happening now. Yeah, but I think that once the strike is over, I think that'll probably be a number one priority on the list of Disney to get them. I think that the audience loves this movie so much, and there was so much love. I mean, look, to get this Emmy nomination, but it's also nominated for Best Movie and Score, so it's a 3-time Emmy nominated movie. Why not make another one?
Yes, and Emmy voters, if you're watching this, don't forget Salvador for Best Costumes at the Emmys, and we are rooting for you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, have a great day.
You too.